Preston Phillips stood on that conference room table like he was announcing the next iPhone launch. Except instead of unveiling some revolutionary product, he pointed straight at me and yelled, "You're done, Calvin," just like that. 16 years of keeping this place secure, and I got fired in front of 25 people while the kid ate a protein bar and called it cutting dead weight. I'm Calvin Rodriguez, 47 years old, and I used to run cybersecurity operations for Philips Security Systems. Used to being the key phrase here. I didn't say a word, didn't argue, just pulled the master access key card from my pocket. The same card I'd carried for over a decade. The one that authenticated every critical system Philips Security operated. Held it up like a bartender sliding a drink to a problem customer and said, "Good luck with that." Preston smirked like he'd just conquered Silicon Valley. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that wasn't just a door card. It was a hardware security token tied to every federal contractor certification Philips Security held, every zero trust perimeter, every compliance framework we operated under. See, Preston wasn't born into this business. He was manufactured in a trust fund factory. You could smell the generational wealth coming off his designer cologne. When his dad, Lawrence, stepped back for some personal discovery journey, the board reluctantly named Preston interim CEO. The kid immediately started calling himself a digital transformation visionary and referring to himself in third person, like some kind of tech deity. Preston sees inefficiencies in our legacy protocols, he'd announced during his first all-hands meeting. Preston believes we need to disrupt our own disruption paradigms. Half the room tried not to laugh. The other half was updating their LinkedIn profiles. Then came the purge. Started that Monday morning by firing Jerry, our documentation specialist who'd been recording security protocols since Windows 95. Poor guy just nodded quietly and packed his cardigan. Jerry had institutional memory stretching back to when we used actual physical keys for server rooms. Preston called him analog dead weight. Next, Preston slashed the training budget and cut 2 remote workers over Zoom, muting them halfway through their goodbyes. Sarah from compliance tried to explain that those remote workers managed our West Coast client authentication systems. Preston waved her off. "We'll automate that process," he said. "Humans are inefficient, but I was the prize, the power move." Preston needed a scapegoat with a name people recognized, someone who represented the old way of doing business, needed to prove the legacy thinking was finished. So he took me out like a rusty server rack, loudly, publicly, with maximum spectacle. "Calvin represents everything that's holding Philips Security back," he announced to the assembled staff. "While he's been building walls, the industry has moved to cloud-native solutions. We need architects, not maintenance workers." The kid had no idea what he was talking about. I wasn't building walls, I was building zero-trust security frameworks that kept federal agencies confident enough to trust us with classified infrastructure contracts. But explaining that would require Preston to understand the difference between cybersecurity theater and actual cybersecurity. I walked past the reception desk, past the shocked interns, past that motivational poster I'd always hated. Innovation drives excellence, and straight to my truck. Sophia Martinez, our receptionist, looked like she was about to cry. She'd been there 8 years, had seen plenty of people come and go, but never like this. Didn't drive home right away. Sat in that parking garage staring at that key card. It felt heavier than usual, not the plastic itself, but what it represented. Access, authority. 16 years of accumulated cybersecurity knowledge that Preston just threw away like a used coffee cup. Then I opened my glove compartment and pulled out the blue binder I'd kept there for emergencies. NIST Cybersecurity Framework Documentation, SOC 2 Compliance Matrices, Federal Contractor Protocols. This wasn't some personal revenge folder. This was institutional memory in 3-ring form. 16 years ago, when Philips Security was still operating out of a converted warehouse in South Austin, Lawrence trusted me with access that didn't come with a fancy title, just massive responsibility. I was the designated security custodian on paper, and the guy who actually kept the data safe in practice. Lawrence understood something his son never would. In the cybersecurity business, trust isn't built on buzzwords or quarterly innovation metrics. It's built on consistent, reliable protection of other people's most sensitive information. Every federal agency, every healthcare system, Every financial institution that contracted with us needed to sleep at night knowing their data was secure. I stayed overnight during the ransomware attack in 2019, manually isolating servers while the automated systems ran diagnostics. When the federal inspector said our security setup violated 3 different compliance standards, I spent a week negotiating variance permits. When vendors threatened to pull contracts over authentication failures, I smoothed things over with personal relationships built over years. I had signing authority on security certifications, federal compliance documents, and vendor authorizations that Preston didn't even know existed. More importantly, I had the vendor relationships and institutional knowledge to make those signatures mean something. Lawrence had made me the single point of contact for every critical vendor relationship, every compliance requirement, every system that kept Philips security running. Not because I was a control freak, but because that's how you maintain security in a federal contracting environment. One person signs, one person is responsible, one person can be held accountable. You don't fire the master encryption key. You transition them properly. You document the handover. You spend weeks training their replacement. You say thank you and throw a retirement party. But Preston wanted headlines, not process. He wanted disruption theater, not operational continuity. Let him play CEO. Let him fire good people and throw tantrums about legacy thinking. He just eliminated the one person who knew where all the digital security was buried. My front door always stuck a little. Foundation shifted during that 2011 earthquake, and I never bothered fixing it. Kinda liked that it pushed back when something wasn't right. I kicked it open, dropped my bag by the coffee maker, and sat at my kitchen table. I wasn't angry yet, just quiet. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when something you've built gets handed to someone who thinks cybersecurity is just another software subscription. I went to the hall closet and reached behind the winter coats, pulled down a black binder that hadn't seen daylight since our last federal audit. Inside was everything Preston forgot to ask about during his streamlining: vendor authorization codes, NIST compliance protocols, SOX documentation requirements, multi-factor authentication hierarchies, and on page 1 in official government letterhead, Calvin Rodriguez, designated security custodian for Philips Security Federal Contractor Certification. When you don't demand corner offices or executive parking spots, people forget what they've signed. But I remembered every late-night conference call with federal auditors, every emergency security patch, every compliance deadline I'd met, while everyone else was focused on quarterly earnings. My signature wasn't just on internal documents. It was registered with 3 federal agencies as the primary contact for security clearance verification. The Marines taught me that security and supply chains are only as strong as their weakest link. Turned out I wasn't just a link in Philips Security's chain. I was the master encryption key holding the whole thing together. So I started making calls. First call was to Sophia at Secure Host Infrastructure. She picked up on the second ring, voice already tense. Calvin, thank God. We've been getting credential verification errors since this afternoon. What's going on over there? I kept it simple and professional, just letting you know I'm no longer authorized for maintenance overrides on the Tier 3 systems. Dead silence then. But your name's still the primary contact on our federal contractor portal. You're listed as the compliance verification officer. Not my problem anymore, Sophia. You'll need to reach out to someone else. Who? We don't have anyone else in our system. I could hear her typing frantically. Sophia had been managing our hosting relationship for 8 years. She knew how these government contracts worked. One missing signature could freeze millions in billing. Calvin, this is serious. If we can't verify compliance status, we have to suspend services pending audit. That's a federal requirement. I understand. You should probably call Philips Security directly. We tried, got transferred to some kid named Bryce who hung up on us. Second call was to Thomas at CyberGuard Solutions, our badge and surveillance vendor. He actually chuckled when I told him about my situation. That explains the dashboard alerts we've been seeing. Someone tried rebooting your authentication server around 3 p.m. Locked the whole system. They what? Yeah, looks like they thought it was a Windows machine. Just hit restart when the badges started throwing errors. Now it's stuck in safe mode and won't accept administrative commands. Thomas had installed our security system back when we moved into the current building. former Army Signal Corps, knew his way around both military and civilian protocols. We'd worked together through 2 major upgrades and countless small fixes. Here's the thing, Calvin. Your biometric signature is hard-coded into the root authentication matrix. Even if I wanted to help them, I can't create new admin access without your physical presence for retinal scan verification. How long until the system times out? 72 hours. Then it goes into full lockdown mode. After that, we're looking at a complete reinstall. New hardware, new everything. Probably 6 weeks minimum, assuming they can get federal approval for the replacement components. Third call was to Patricia at Apex Facilities, our building management contractor. She was already frustrated before I explained my situation. The HVAC system's been acting crazy all afternoon. Temperature sensors are giving bad readings, and the backup generators won't accept remote commands. That's because the environmental control system is tied into the same authentication network as everything else. Can you walk me through the override procedures? Patricia, I don't work there anymore. You'll need to contact Philips Security for authorization. We tried. They said you were the only one with administrative access to the facility systems. Fourth call was to Janet at First National Banking, our primary financial services provider. Janet managed our business accounts and had been asking me about some authentication updates for weeks. Calvin, perfect timing. We've been getting error messages on your corporate account access. Our system shows your authorization credentials as terminated, but you're still listed as the primary verification officer. That's correct, Janet. I no longer work for Philips Security. But Calvin, this is a problem. Federal banking regulations require us to freeze accounts when the designated verification officer is removed without proper transition documentation. We can't process any electronic transactions until this gets resolved. How long does that usually take? With proper documentation, 24 hours. Without it, could be weeks while we work. With federal regulators to verify the company's compliance status. I made notes in my binder, not for revenge, just keeping track of the cascade effects. When you pull one thread in a complex security system, everything else starts unraveling in predictable ways. That was the pattern. For 16 years, I'd been the central point of contact for every vendor relationship, every compliance requirement, every system that kept Philips Security running. Not because I was a control freak, but because that's how you maintain security in a federal contracting environment. Preston thought he was firing a middle manager. What he actually did was yank the master security token out of a Swiss watch and hand the pieces to someone who'd never seen the inside of a timepiece. Tuesday morning, 7:30 a.m., exactly 24 hours after my termination, the first wave hit. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it from Sophia Martinez, our receptionist, who called me from her personal phone around 8 a.m. Calvin, it's chaos here. Nobody can get into the building. The badge readers are just beeping at everyone. Preston's outside in the parking lot screaming at his phone. The overnight security guard, Carl, had gone home at 6 a.m. like always. The automatic lock system was supposed to re-enable badge access at 7 a.m. Instead, it stayed in secure mode because the authentication server couldn't verify any administrative users. 240 employees standing outside in business casual, clustering around badge readers like confused tourists at a locked museum. I could picture it perfectly. The morning coffee crowd from the Starbucks next door probably thought it was some kind of corporate team-building exercise. It got worse. Thomas Williams, our head of technology and probably the smartest guy in the building, tried explaining the situation to Preston over speakerphone while half the company listened in. We can't provision new badge access until we transfer the master authentication credentials from Calvin's account. So do it, Preston demanded. I could hear the stress cracking his usual confidence. We can't, sir. Calvin was the root administrator. Only he could create new administrative accounts without triggering federal security protocols. Can't you hack around it? You're the IT director. Figure it out. He designed it specifically to resist unauthorized access. It's compliant with NIST cybersecurity frameworks and Defense Department tamper-resistant standards. If we try to bypass it, the system will flag us as a potential security breach and notify federal oversight. That's when Preston's voice went up an octave. What do you mean notify federal oversight? The DoD requires automatic reporting of any attempted security bypasses on contractor systems. We'd be flagged for investigation within hours. By 9 a.m., someone had called a locksmith. Professional guy who took one look at the badge readers and shook his head. Sophia told me he actually laughed when Preston demanded he just drill them out. These aren't mechanical locks, son. This is a fully integrated electronic security system. I can't just drill these out without setting off alarms from here to Washington. Preston finally called the fire department, claiming it was an emergency evacuation issue. The fire chief, a former Marine named Rodriguez, same last name as me, which made Sophia giggle when she told the story, took about 30 seconds to size up the situation. Son, this isn't a fire emergency. This is a management problem. Your people can get out of the building just fine. They just can't get back in. Maybe next time, don't fire your security administrator without reading the manual first. The building stayed locked until 2 p.m. when Sophia from SecureHost drove over with an emergency access device she kept for situations exactly like this. Cost Philips Security $5,000 in emergency service fees just to unlock their own front door. But that was just Tuesday. Wednesday brought the payroll crisis. Janet from finance called me Wednesday morning, voice tight with stress. Calvin, I know this is awkward, but we need your authorization token for the payroll run. The system won't process without dual verification. Janet, I don't work there anymore. You'll need to update the authorization matrix. That's what I told Preston. He said to just override it somehow. I had to laugh. You can't override federal banking regulations with management enthusiasm. Those protocols exist for a reason. What reason? Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. Every federal contractor has to maintain separation of financial authority. One person controls the money. Another person verifies the transactions. If both signatures come from the same authorization level, it triggers an audit flag. Janet went quiet. She'd been doing payroll for 6 years, but never had to understand the underlying compliance architecture. Why would she? That was my job. How long do we have? Payroll processors give you 72 hours to resolve authentication issues before they freeze the account. After that, you're looking at manual check processing for 240 people. By Thursday morning, the vendor calls started coming to me instead of Philips Security. Word travels fast in the cybersecurity vendor network. When a major contractor's compliance officer gets terminated without transition, people start asking questions. Michael from TechFlow Industries called around 10 a.m. Calvin, I heard you're no longer with Philips Security. That true? That's correct. Well, that's a problem. Our automated system flagged your company as non-compliant this morning. Your purchase orders require verification from the designated custodial officer before shipment. That's been you for 8 years. Not anymore, Michael? Who's the new custodial officer? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. Michael sighed. Calvin, you and I both know how this works. One missing signature could freeze millions in billing. We're going to have to suspend all. Shipments pending customer verification review. How long does that usually take? With proper documentation and federal approval. 6 to 8 weeks minimum. New background checks, new vendor qualifications, new compliance review. And that's assuming no violations are found. Fifth call came from Rebecca at Cyber Insurer, our cybersecurity insurance provider. Her voice was professional but concerned. Calvin, we're conducting our quarterly compliance review and noticed some irregularities in your authentication systems. Our monitoring software shows multiple security protocol violations over the past 48 hours. That's because they fired their security administrator without proper transition. Long pause. I see. Calvin, this puts us in a difficult position. Our policy requires active cybersecurity oversight by a qualified professional. If Philips Security no longer has designated security management, we may need to suspend coverage pending compliance verification. What does that mean for them? No cybersecurity insurance means they can't fulfill federal contractor obligations. Most of their clients require active coverage as part of the contract terms. By Thursday afternoon, the cascade was accelerating. Sophia called to tell me that 3 senior engineers had submitted their resignations. Word was getting around Austin's tech community that Philips Security was having management issues. Other companies were already reaching out to their key staff with job offers. Preston's been in meetings with lawyers all day, Sophia whispered. Lawrence is flying back from his retreat. The board called an emergency meeting for Friday. That's when I knew the real consequences were just beginning. Friday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. Global Tech Corporation's legal department. Mr. Rodriguez, this is Jennifer Walsh from Global Tech Legal. We're conducting a compliance review regarding the Philips security contract and would appreciate a few minutes of your time. The hammer was about to fall. Jennifer was thorough and professional, asked specific questions about my role, my termination circumstances, and current access status. I answered everything honestly. Mr. Rodriguez, according to our records, you were the verified custodial officer for all federal contractor certifications. Is that correct? Yes. And you were terminated without a formal transition of those responsibilities? That's correct. Are you aware of any compliance violations or irregularities that might have prompted your termination? No. I was fired for being dead weight according to the interim CEO. Long pause. I see. And in your professional opinion, does Philips Security currently have proper custodial oversight for federal contracting requirements? No, they don't. How long would remediation typically take? 6 to 8 months minimum. New background checks, new vendor qualifications, new federal oversight approval. And that's assuming no compliance violations are found during the review process. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Rodriguez. We may have follow-up questions. Monday morning, the hammer fell. Global Tech's procurement office sent a formal notice to Philips Security. Contract negotiations suspended pending compliance verification review. The $180 million cybersecurity contract, representing roughly 40% of Philips Security's annual revenue, was officially on hold. Preston called an emergency staff meeting. I wasn't there, but Sophia filled me in later. He stood in the same conference room where he'd fired me and tried to explain why their biggest client had just walked away from the negotiating table. This is a temporary misunderstanding, he told the assembled staff. Global Tech is being overly cautious about some paperwork issues. We'll have this resolved within the week. Thomas Williams, the IT director, raised his hand. Preston, if this is just paperwork, why don't we fix it? We're working on it. Who's working on it? Calvin was our compliance officer. We don't need Calvin. We can handle this internally. With who? You fired the only person who knew how the compliance systems worked. Preston's face went red. We'll figure it out. That afternoon, Philips Security's stock price dropped 12% on news of the Global Tech contract suspension. The financial press picked up the story. Philips Security loses major contract amid compliance concerns. Local business reporters started digging into the details. They found the timeline. Compliance officer terminated Monday, major contract suspended Friday. The optics were devastating. Lawrence Phillips cut his personal discovery journey short and flew back from whatever meditation retreat he'd been attending. By Wednesday, he was back in the building, having quiet conversations with board members and looking like a man who'd just discovered his house was on fire. The final board meeting wasn't on any public calendar. No corporate communications, no press releases. This was the kind of meeting that happens behind closed doors with phones left outside and voices kept deliberately low. Patricia Lawson, the general counsel, called me Thursday evening. Calvin, I need to ask you some questions for the board. Can you come in Friday morning, 9 a.m.? Am I being subpoenaed? No, nothing like that. We just need your professional assessment of the current situation. I showed up wearing my best suit. Marine dress blues taught me that how you present yourself matters when the stakes are high. The boardroom felt different than it had during my firing. Quieter, more serious. Lawrence Phillips sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 2 weeks. Preston was there, flanked by legal counsel, and what looked like a stack of documentation with my name highlighted throughout. Patricia started with the basics. Calvin, can you walk us through your role as systems custodian? For 20 minutes, I explained the compliance architecture I'd built over 16 years. Federal. Contractor requirements, vendor authorization matrices, financial oversight protocols. The board listened without interrupting, taking notes. When you were terminated, was there any transition of these responsibilities? No. I was told to clean out my desk and leave immediately. One board member leaned forward. Mr. Rodriguez, in your professional opinion, can Philips Security currently fulfill its federal contracting obligations? No, sir. not without significant remediation and recertification. How significant? 6 to 8 months minimum. New background checks, new vendor qualifications, new federal oversight approval. And that's assuming no compliance violations are found during the review process. Lawrence asked the question I'd been expecting. What would it take to fix this quickly? You'd need me to come back and execute a proper transition. But even then, the damage to vendor relationships and client confidence would take years to repair. Preston finally spoke up. This is all being blown out of proportion. We can hire consultants to handle the paperwork. Patricia slid a folder across the table. These are the estimates from 3 different compliance consulting firms. Minimum cost $2.8 million. Timeline 12 to 18 months. And that's with no guarantee that federal agencies will accept the transition. The room went quiet. You could hear the HVAC system cycling, the same system that was still throwing temperature alerts because nobody knew how to reset the authentication protocols. There's one more thing, Patricia continued. The SEC has opened a preliminary inquiry into the global tech contract suspension. They want to understand why a major federal contractor suddenly terminated their compliance officer without documentation. Lawrence's face went gray. Are we under investigation? Not yet. But the optics are terrible. Companies don't usually fire their oversight officers unless something's wrong. The SEC is wondering what we're hiding. That afternoon, Philips Securities Board voted to remove Preston as interim CEO and reinstated Lawrence as active chairman. The press release was carefully worded. Leadership transition to ensure operational continuity during a period of strategic realignment. Corporate speak for we fired the boss's son before he burned the place down. I spent the weekend setting up Rodriguez Cybersecurity Consulting, rented a small office downtown, had business cards printed, registered with the State Business Bureau. Nothing fancy, just professional. Monday morning, my phone started ringing. First call was from Michael at TechFlow Industries. Calvin, I heard you're consulting now. We've got 3 clients asking about compliance verification services. Interested? Second call was from Sophia at SecureHost. Calvin, our other federal contractor clients are nervous about their compliance status. Can you do audits? By Wednesday, I had 5 clients signed and 3 more scheduled for consultation. Word travels fast in the federal. Contracting world, especially when a major company implodes over compliance issues. Philips Security struggled for months. Lawrence managed to stabilize operations, but the global tech contract was permanently lost. They had to lay off 65 people and sell their government contracting division to stay solvent. Preston disappeared from the local business scene. Last I heard, he was running a cryptocurrency startup in Austin, telling people he was a disruption specialist. 6 months later, I was sitting in my expanded office reviewing proposals for a $15 million federal consulting contract when Sophia called. Calvin, Lawrence Phillips is here, says he wants to hire Rodriguez Cybersecurity Consulting for compliance oversight. I looked out my window at the Philips Security building across the street. Still there, still operating, but smaller now. Humbled. Tell him I'll call him back, I said. I'm booked solid for the next 6 months. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being too busy to return phone calls.